Date is April 19th, time is 6:02. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Joe Matuk,
President.
Tony Aiken, Mark Santow,
President.
Erlen Rojo,
Here.
Travis Escobar, Tyrell Stevens.
President. All right. Next, pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
Pledge
to
of
the
allegiance to the flag
of the
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on the agenda, superintendent's comments.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking time out to be here with us this evening. It's always a pleasure to be here. The work that we do, it's bigger than who we are. It's about our students and our community. So I want to say thank you for taking time out of your day and your evening to be here with us. I would like to, I know there's a lot on the agenda, so I just have a few updates, so bear with me. First, I would like to start by saying that the Spring Break Academy was a success. We had with the RICAS and SATs and PSAT taking place this week. It has been a really busy break for our students and the teachers and the parents and everyone that participated during that week. We had over 1,700 students across the district who came for extra academic supports during the April vacation. And that was broken down to about 898 elementary students, 347 middle grade students, and 471 high school students who came for extracurricular support during the vacation. We're also proud to have provided our students with a safe, welcoming place to get the extra help that they needed and spend time with their friends during the break. I will say but it's we, as a team, want to extend a big thank you to our teachers and our staff that helped make this a huge success. So I want to say thank you for them. We know that extending the learning opportunity is a vital for our students, making sure they get back on track, especially after the pandemic. So we want to do everything we can to give our students the opportunity to be successful in school. I would also like to announce that the free meal distribution during the April vacation was a success. We were able to give out 7,200 boxes of food, which is an equivalent to 144,000 meals, and it's about 180,000 pounds of food, which was distributed to our families and our communities during that time. And I can tell you there was a big demand. I was able to go to 2 locations, and then I spent the majority of my time at the Sesto Middle School. And the line started at 9 in the morning, and still about 12:30, there was still a line around the corner, and everybody was hustling, making sure that they were giving the parents what they need in our community. So that was huge. I would also want to say a big thank you to the many partners and volunteers who made it a true community event. It was awesome to see everyone hands-on doing the work. I would also like to share the announcement of the 2023 Edward Hinklins Bradford Scholarship, which is is open live now, and the deadline to submit the application is May 5th, if I'm not mistaken, at 11:59 p.m. This is for all families, regardless of the family's income, so they can obtain the opportunity for a college degree. It's a $750 scholarship for students who are challenged, socially, economically challenged, but also follows the lines in the FAFSA applications. Also, the students must be able to show proof of acceptance to a 2-year associate's or 4-year bachelor's degree or technical program, and it's making sure that it's part of the accreditation institute for higher learning. They have to show proof that they've been accepted to one of those programs, or they can demonstrate involvement in extracurricular and community involvement. So those are some of the criteria for our students in order to receive the $750 per school. I would also like to speak a little bit about our summer learning initiatives. As mentioned, the focus is on accelerating learning with our focus on extended learning. We're formulating a plan for how to make sure that what we're going to do and how we're going to service our students during the summer learning initiative. So we're putting a plan together for that. Also, another big announcement is the Eat, Play, Learn PPD is back. PPSD is partnering with the city of Providence and various partners to increase the access for year-round learning opportunity, which is offering in several locations College Vision Summer Prep Program, Inspiring Mind, Kids Bridge Summer Learning Program, the Boys and Girls Club in Providence, the YMCA in Greater Providence, the Sullivan Learning Center, the Generation Tech. These are all partners who are participating in the Eat, Play, Learn initiative. The programs also offer free meals, recreation opportunities, and summer jobs for youth. So that's also a big opportunity for our students. If you need more information, please go to eatplaylearnpvd.com. One word, eatplaylearn.com, pvd.com. And also a big announcement, also a great opportunity to share that last week we had survey work and it ended last week, and PPSD had a tap vote. I'm trying to make sure that everything we're doing is correlating and attached to our turnaround action plan. And I can say that right now PPSD has over 39% of the PPSD families participated in the survey, which surpassed our TAC vote. So I would like to give that big round of applause. I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to all the families who participated, the staff who participated, making sure that we're getting the word out to the parents as needed and support. Also, our office's face did an extremely awesome job, making sure that we're communicating with families, going to the houses, going with the families' work, and making sure that they had the opportunity to fill out the application. So these are some of the quick updates that I have for tonight. So thank you once again for having me here, and also for spending your time, your evening with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next item on the agenda, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion's been made, it's been seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Next item on the agenda is public comment, right to be heard. On my list, first I have Amanda Bellino. Welcome, and you have 3 minutes for your remarks. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, school board members. Good evening, and thank you for your time. My name is Amanda Bellino. I am currently an English teacher at Hope High School. I say currently in the fact that I received a displacement letter on the 27th of February due to current lack of ESL certification. I have registered with the emergency cohort, attended an emergency cohort meeting, and registered through the American College of Education to rectify this issue. Started classes last week. The reason for delaying this process in the first place was due to significant financial hardship, as I'm living on a single person's income and caring for 2 elderly parents with severe health issues and still repaying graduate studies loans from Providence College. Thus, have not been able to commit finances or time necessary to return to school. It has only been through generosity of my parents and their understanding of my situation that I was able to secure the resources to initiate this process. Ironically enough, prior to attending the cohort meeting on March 15th, I had re-interviewed from my job at Hope High School, which had been consolidated, and I was told that the re-interview process was, quote, because the title of the job had changed from going to a straight ELA position to an ELA-ESL split, unquote. The atmosphere of the interview was not a very welcoming one, since other candidates who had interviewed for their positions were also told that, quote, the interview was only merely a formality. Interesting, I did not receive such a comment, considering those candidates have been new to my building, and I have been currently in my position for 16 years. On March 21st, I received an email saying I had not been rehired for my position at Hope. While I was and still am devastated by this development, my ultimate concern is not for myself, but for the impact that will be felt by the student body I have faithfully served during my tenure. I have made everlasting connections with these students and their families through my position as a senior class advisor, having been in charge of the prom since 2011, attending numerous parent-teacher conferences and IEP meetings for the benefit of my students, and numerous sporting events and championships, particularly in volleyball, unified, basketball, baseball, and wrestling. I've also supported numerous events on behalf of the Hope JROTC Blue Wave Battalion, such as their annual drill competitions, and been an honored guest at their military ball for the past 10 years. It is at these events my students see me and make it a point to introduce me to their families, who in turn are able to connect a name with a face as, quote, the English teacher my son or daughter can't stop talking about. It puzzles me to no extent they who claim or who are committed to the well-being and best interests of our students would remove a teacher who has significantly one of the best attended classes in the building for the last 16 years. In attending the aforementioned cohort last month, it didn't come to a complete surprise that all teachers in attendance, myself included, had at least a minimum of 20 years of teaching experience under their belts. Rhode Island General Law 16-11-10, which took effect on January 1st of last year, 2022, says in part, quote, that the Department of Education shall provide rules and regulations to streamline the ESL teaching certification, including but not limited to providing classes for current Rhode Island certified teachers at the individual school level within each school district, unquote. As of today, no such course has been offered to Providence teachers, forcing hundreds of us to spend thousands of dollars for courses necessary for certification in order to keep employment. This, in our understanding, is a clear violation of the law and demonstrating a complete lack of equity in part of the Department of Education. It is clear to me at this point in time that the criterion-based hiring process is dysfunctional. It does not serve the purpose for which it was intended, and neither, unfortunately, does the state takeover, which was put into effect several years ago and is now in year 3 of its service. After all, how is it that a 20-year veteran of Providence teacher has applied to no less than 6 positions in the district since my displacement letter and received only the 1 interview for the position that I have held for 16 years?
Let me interrupt you, let me know, but just let me know your time's up. But you can finish.
Providence School District has lost almost 100 teachers in the last 3 years because of the toxicity brought about by this takeover. It is the hope and wish of this teacher for the benefit of our students, for their success in both future and current, that the criterion-based hiring system be severely overhauled and that the takeover plan be stopped immediately for, even though it is maybe best for business, it is definitely not what is the best interest of our students and for education. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Next is Caitlin Terrell. Welcome, you have 3 minutes.
As you all know, by this point, my name is Kate Gray, and I'm a parent of 2 children who attend Allentown 510 Broad Street, and I'm also the PTO president. I'm here today to make my voice heard and to speak up for everyone in my community who has been left out of the decision to close our neighborhood school. This school, to anyone driving by, might just be a building, might just be a school, but to the Washington Park community, it is a second home and a safe place. It is the only public district elementary school that serves the Washington Park community. Parents and teachers collected data, and more than 72% of students walk to school and then still walk home. My family personally lives 5 houses away from the school, and Ryan will argue we have a lack of green space. But if you walk a total of 6 minutes from the school's front door, we have access to the green space and resources of Roger Williams Park, which includes the Museum of Natural History, a planetarium, Roger Williams Zoo, and so much more. Despite the importance of this school to our community, Providence Schools and the Rhode Island Department of Education left the community out of this decision-making process. The only reason I personally found out about the closing was on December 12, 2022, when I thought I had a PTO meeting to go finish up making reindeer food. The leaders from Providence Schools and RIDE have admitted that no meetings at all were held with the families, students, or staff of ASF until after the decision to close was announced. Following the announcement, other families and I have been ignored, blocked from phone calls, blocked from emails, and disrespected from RIDE, the commissioner, and the superintendent. This closure is the worst thing to happen to my family personally. My children will have to now be bused, and on separate buses due to 2 of my children now having IEPs. I will not know if my child, who has separation anxiety from me, transitioned into school well, or if he's breaking down crying, asking where mommy is. There are some families that, because they are barely under a mile away from other schools that they have now been assigned to, now have to walk. some of which do not have transportation. So that means rain, snow, cold, heat, they're walking. And if the children's parents can't, they're walking alone. That means Allen's Ave, Broad Street, and Eddy Street, just to make sure they're at school. We were also told that the district was unsure if crossing guards would be available to keep our children safe. For months, we have spoke up at the school board meetings, RIDE meetings, and city council meetings. We've gone on the news, we spoke to the State House. So today I'm here once again demanding that the leaders at the private schools and around the Department of Education listen to our community and stop the closure of our school. Keep Allen Strong Feinstein Elementary at Broad Street open. Invest in our school, invest in our children, because I promise you they will surprise you because they are our future.
Thank you, Ms. Fiore. Next, we have Jessica Sylvester. Welcome, you have 3 minutes. You can start when you're ready.
Good evening. Thank you for this time to speak. I am here to speak on the unjust reasoning as to why Mr. Capello, the principal at Del Sesto Middle School, is being replaced. I have been a teacher in this district since 1998 and have been at Del Sesto since 2002. During this time, I have had at least over 12 principals, a few dozen vice principals. The political agenda in which way the things are done in Providence is getting old and tired. The faculty heard of this rumor a few months ago, but Mr. Capello did not find out until last week until he received a certified letter. Ironically, he is allowed to apply at any other school in Providence, but just not Del Sesto. Not quite sure how this makes any sense. It has also been mentioned that a person from downtown does not want to see him or our school be successful. It would behoove this board to investigate this sudden change in leadership. Del Sesto finally has a leader that is leading the school in the right direction. Teacher morale is higher than it has been in the past 8 years. Teachers are actually applying to come back to Del Sesto. And with this recent news, teachers are now looking to leave, and the teachers who wanted to come because of this principal are hesitant to. Teacher-student attendance is up, suspension and disciplinary referrals are down. We are leading the district for early data at 1.27 years of growth, I believe. Providence is at 0.9. Student government and National Junior Honor Society were created this year. Students are taking ownership in activities at our school. The school is actually going through a STEM redesign in which the principal has done the majority of the work to create this plan. This has nothing to do with the new person coming in, but it's a constant disruption to Del Sesto. There is no consistency, and the educational data shows that it takes at least 3 years for gains to show, but we have made more gains in 7 months than we have in a very long time. If this was truly about what was best for the students, which this is not, then the commissioner and the district would think about the message this sends to our students. A 7th grader at Del Sesto will now have had 3 principals. We are supposed to lead by example for our students. How does this look when the school department shows our students that by working hard, creating positive change, showing up every day and being an inspiring leader, that it can all be wiped away by politics? What student would aspire to become a teacher or an administrator? I personally remember my middle school principal. It was Dr. Fred Pasquarello at Ferry Middle School in Johnston. He actually inspired me to run for student government in high school, and I was class vice president for 4 years. Why can't we do better in Providence?
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Next on our list is Representative Enrique Sanchez.
Please, 30 and 32 seconds in the bathroom.
Has anybody seen Representative? Well, if he gets here in the next couple of minutes, we'll accommodate him. So that brings us to the close of public comment. Next item on the agenda is school board member comments. Any comments from any school board members here tonight? Ms. Aiken?
My comments, it's more of an announcement. Been selected by REASC as a nominating committee to be on their board as well, and I will be elected at the annual meeting.
Congratulations, Ms. Aiken.
Thank you.
Any other comments from school board members tonight? Mr. Matek? Oh, good. Really quick, I just want to, number one, I want to thank everyone involved for the Spring Break Academy. So central office, educators, everyone who was responsible for making that happen. Any opportunity we have to put students in a safe environment where they're being cared for, where they're being fed, and where the idle time is being put to productive use is a win. So I just want to shout that out as a moment of all these different stakeholders working together and producing something that's beneficial for the community. So thank you to everyone involved. Secondly, I just want to state for the record, we have been unraveling this Senator Zerier bill and the implications for the school board. And I have received a couple of inquiries regarding language regarding the review and the advice of the board when it comes to senior level hires. So our school board council is not here, but I have already had this conversation with them. I want to put on the record that we as a board are requesting that our council provide us a legal opinion on what that language exactly means. That's the end of my comments. Representative Sanchez, I see you here. You were signed up. Would you like to quickly give some remarks or public comment? Representative, you have 3 minutes. You can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today. Thank you, members of the committee, of the school board. I am here tonight to make a few remarks and bring up a few points for discussion. Thank you for all your work. Good luck this year. I know you're all doing well and are working hard every day to put our Providence kids, our Providence youth, and parents before anything. Thank you very much. It's very appreciated. I'm here to discuss a couple points, bring up a couple things to attention. I have resigned from Providence Schools as a long-term sub unofficially. I started working in the working with immigrant youth and with refugee youth as a caseworker for Dorcas International. But part of that reason is with a lot of issues that have been happening at Central High School, where I was working at for the last 2 years as a long-term sub. I was a Spanish teacher. A lot of things that I had not mentioned, had not gone public with, and working directly with youth and working directly with administrators. I am here to bring this up to the general public because it has to be brought to attention, okay? I'm not here speaking in any personal note or anything, but I think the current principal at Central High and one of the vice principals, Ms. Keegan, have not been following up and have not been working in the appropriate manner that they had been working there. And there was some issues there, some sort of attacks as well that I experienced, okay, but it's okay. You know, I'm not, like I said, I'm gonna put the youth, the work of what's been happening in our education system before anything. It's fine, I moved on, I'm gonna keep working, but I think it's important to discuss the internal matters that have been happening in Providence schools. With all this pushing out of our Black and brown educators, our administrators. I don't want to name names tonight or anything, but you know, I have a lot of information here before me that I think all of you should look into and take into consideration. Okay, and all of this, okay, is in accordance with trying to do the right thing. All right, most of you here are on the board, grew up in the Providence School District. You know, you all know what we've been through to get to where we're at as Black and brown youth, the injustices we faced. All right, you guys are in positions of power. I'm in a position, you know, working in the state house. We're trying to do the right thing for our youth. Don't we want our Black and brown youth to become leaders as well? Don't we want them to become politicians, presidents of school board, leaders in the community, presidents of nonprofits? Don't we want them to be here? But what we're trying to do and speaking up for ourselves, we get pushback. We get attacked. We get punished. We have to pay the consequences. Why are we having to deal with those negative implications when we've been through the struggle, we understand, and we've worked hard. I want our youth to continue to be leaders in the education system, to become leaders in politics in Providence. I don't want to be in politics all my life. I want Providence youth from Central High, from Hope High School, from the Met, from our elementary schools, from our middle schools, to become politicians, to become leaders, to become school board members. That's why I'm bringing kids from SMS here school. That's why I'm bringing kids from all elementary schools. That's why I'm bringing kids from the John Hope Settlement House. That's why I'm trying to bring kids from, that's why I'm bringing kids, youth from our high schools, from our middle schools to the State House, so that they develop that conscience, that they develop that awareness to become those future leaders. Again, this is nothing personal, all right, or anything, but it becomes a problem because folks who are holding us back are taking this personal. And I'm more than welcome to sit down and talk to each and every single one of you about those details, okay? This is out of good faith. This is not about doing the wrong thing. We've dealt with these issues for decades now in Providence schools, but if we don't address this corruption that exists in Providence schools, then we're never gonna move anywhere with our youth, all right? Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Representative. Vice Chairman Escobar?
Yeah, thank you. I just, I created having this email. So CTE programs are very important to Providence schools. We are elevating, re-energizing the committee that's been in our bylaws. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and have our school board comments, public comments in general in the So George Matuk will be working with me on the CTE committee. And this is something that I will follow up with via school board in terms of more detailed email. But we're going to have 6 members appointed to the board with George and myself. That allows for 1 other individual. I believe that could be a person as a student or alumni, but also would encourage the board and others in the community to sort of like think about who that individual would be. But I reached out to Brett Dickens, who runs our CTE programs, and just sort of a couple of updates. May 1st, there's going to be a statewide project MFG wielding competition at PCTA. May 18th, there's going to be an appreciation event for employers of over 100 student interns during the current school year. June 8th is going to be a PPSD CTE signing day for students transitioning to union apprenticeships and industry. CTE programs is going to be 5 programs that are going to be run throughout the summer. Additional training in selected CTE programs at PCTA, a firefighter program at Central, CNA program at Rhode Island Nursing Education, a dual enrollment at EQ. Students will be taking 2 college courses, 1 in computer science, RIT, and there's going to be summer internships at various employers. And also, we were just granted $140,000 in an equity grant from RIDE to improve outcomes for MLL students out there. Hoping to have our first meeting of the CTE committee in May. And I think for my term in running this committee, I think there's a real opportunity to do a strategic plan. Like look at what does the future of CTE programs look like for PPSD? There's been a whole lot of conversation around sort of like AI. If you follow the news, if you follow AI and sort of what's going on, our economy is going to shift a lot over the next decade. It's very important that Providence, our students, is able to know about new technologies that are sort of coming up, know about and sort of be able to evaluate what sort of workforce do we need to prepare our students for the future. So part of what my role for CTE is going to be, I want to champion this work. This is, we talk sometimes a lot of the negativity that exists, unfortunately, in PPSD. I think that gets sort of like highlighted. But our students, these type of programs, they're doing great work. We have students making solid incomes while being a student here, right? I see a little smile coming. Those are great success stories that are happening in Providence. And I feel sometimes in Providence, especially in the school board setting, we just hear a lot of the bad, we hear a lot of the negative, but we are producing a lot of successful young people. And CTE is definitely a part of it. So my role, at least for the next 2 years, the end of 2024, is what does the future look like in our economy? And how do we best equip our Providence students to make a good financial living in this country, right? Live that American dream, be able to buy a house, be able to have a good income, be able to go to travel, be able to just have a nice life, right? And I think the CTE programs that we have is a huge puzzle to that piece. So at least, I was just gonna send an email to everyone. I didn't know if I wanted to use the school board comments for that, but felt like I wanted to end a little bit on a positive note.
Thank you, Vice President Escobar. It's really nice to hear that you are shepherding that work, and I can't wait to see what results it is. All right, any other school board member comments? Hearing none, moving on to committee updates. Policy Committee, Dr. Shinta.
Hello, everybody. So the policy committee, essentially just due to a scheduling snafu, was unable to have quorum to meet this most recent time. But we've been doing work offline that will manifest itself at our next meeting on May 3rd with Dr. Onye and her team on our revised race equity policy, which we are very excited about. I personally am incredibly excited about. It has the possibility, I think, of being really a transformative step for us as a district. There is nothing more mission critical to this district, to this city, to this country, for that matter, than racial justice and equity. So we're very much looking forward to bringing that policy forward at our next committee meeting. We will also be looking at the multi-tiered system of support policy, which is just as central to what we do in the district and very much intertwined with the issue of equity, seeing our kids and their families where they are, who they are, and helping them to flourish in all sorts of different ways. So the policy committee is undertaking some really critical stuff at our next meeting. Certainly those meetings are public, so I invite those of you in the public to join us and participate. So that is policy.
Thank you, Chairman Santel. Next up, Finance Committee, Vice Chairman Stevens.
I'll let you comment as well. We had a couple contracts, nothing too massive, nothing to complain about. Loved all the contracts that we had, so I recommend to approve them. Anything, Ms. Tony?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we did review 3 contracts. They were all in line with ongoing with the CAP goals. We had an in-depth review and have approved them accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Thank you, Ms. Aiken. Chairman Himmelberg isn't here right now. Ms. Aiken, could you provide us an update from the most recent Health and Wellness Committee?
Yes, the Health and Wellness Committee, first of all, I'm very excited to be on that committee. I was very productive, and we spoke about the social emotional learning program that is being rolled out, and we're getting more involved with the working groups in that committee, so that's exciting. And we also talked about the activities, the recreation and activities, and that was really good information, as well as the nutrition for the students. And we also spoke about the April vacation with the lunch program, free lunch program, and that was very successful, and it was a very productive meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Aiken. Next is consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve item 6.1 through 6.5? Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion's been made, it's been seconded. Is this a voice vote or roll call vote?
Roll call.
Roll call vote. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
George Matuk.
Aye.
Tony Aiken.
Aye.
Mark Santel.
Aye.
Erlen Rojo.
Aye.
Travis Escobar. Tyrell Stevens.
It is unanimous. Next item on the agenda, review of homeschool candidates. Ms. Stewart?
Good evening. Good evening. Sandra Stewart, Chief Student Support Officer for PPSD. Tonight I have 5 homeschool candidates for your approval. These candidates are JT Grade 7, GD Grade 7, JT Grade K, NL Grade 8, and BS Grade 5. All candidates have met the requirements set forth under Rhode Island Law 16-192 and the Providence School Board policy passed last spring. Members of the school board, it is my recommendation that you approve these candidates for homeschool instruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Do I have a motion to accept the recommendation of the approval of these homeschool candidates? I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Next item on the agenda, we have a couple of presentations. First, we have a fiscal year 2024 budget update. Welcome, Mr. Batista.
Hi, good evening. Just waiting for Chief Scott.
Good evening, everyone, and sorry for the delays. My name is Zach Scott. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Operations, and I'm joined here by Chris Patisi, who's our Executive Director of Finance. So we're excited to do a update on our FY24 budget. I don't know if are we able to pull the presentation up on the screen? So while Ms. Cooper is pulling that up, it's all right. We're kind of doing what we've done in the past few years, which is provide in April kind of an initial planning update on our budget. So we are not presenting a budget today, but more giving the board an overview at a high level of what we're looking at for this upcoming fiscal year in terms of revenues and expenses and the implications for our school budgets. We also will share an update on, we advance to the next few slides, a high-level update on spending to date on stimulus funds. So that's been something we've been working through over the past several years and have more to go, but we wanted to give an update there. We will be back in May to present, as we historically done, a kind of more detailed version of our budget, which includes our appropriation, compensation, and classification ordinances. We'll then come back to, once again, talk a little bit more in detail on our ESSER spending, and we're tentatively planning to do that in June. Go to the next slide. So the first section I'll give is a little bit of a budget overview, and that'll talk through some historical trends, some look at our budget over the past few years, some of the new things that have done that we've done this year, before going into some of the more detailed work in the second section. So what you'll see here is a graph at our local revenue over the past decade or so. And local revenue is what we refer to as primarily state aid and city aid. State aid currently is roughly 2/3 of our local aid, with city being the other third. We have a small portion that we'll talk through with Medicaid that represents a small portion. Historically, it's grown by roughly a little over 2%, with the major driver of that being increases in state aid. So as you'll note, in the blue bars, city aid in many years historically has been level funded, with some years where there's been an increase, but cumulatively that led to kind of an annual growth rate of about a little less than 0.5% in terms of city aid, with state aid growing at a little bit more than 3%. When we think of kind of how we organize our budget, organize our investments and decisions we make about our budget, we do align that with the TAP, which is our primary driver for all the work that we do in the district. And so what you'll see here are the 3 pillars of excellence in learning, world-class talent, and engaged communities, as well as efficient district systems. What you'll note below is LEAP, the Learning Equity and Accelerated Pathways, and that is through some of the additional funding that's come through stimulus funds that has allowed us to either one, make investments to accelerate student learning that we could not otherwise do without that funding, or to kind of supercharge or accelerate some of the investments that needed to be made in those pillars. So we actually thought it'd be helpful to walk through very quickly, and we would go back to the past 3 or 4 years. Actually, on one side of that, so move forward one more. So just how we then translate that into kind of budget priorities. When we think of our core pillars here, those are funds that we want to do as much as we can to sustain over time, knowing that many of those investments require years to take hold and develop. So that's where we want to leverage our local dollars to really align with those core pillars. We also want to focus on stimulus funds to support short and medium-term acceleration activities. So like I said, to either kind of supercharge those or do investments we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And then and we'll talk more about this, we've taken steps over the years as it's been one of our priorities in our TAP. We took a significant step forward this year, moving to a student-based budgeting approach. I'll talk through kind of why we did that and how it works. We thought it was helpful just to highlight some of the investments we've made over the past 3 years, both one-time and recurring, because I think you can think of a budget as a one-year event, but it is honestly one thing that you are, if you're doing it well, you're doing it over multiple years and you're sustaining investments that we have. And so what I'll talk through are you'll see some positions, you'll see other investments that we made. And I think it's important to note that a lot of these investments were made not just by spending more money or adding, but really being thoughtful and taking a hard look at our budget where we needed to make changes, either reallocating or changing the way that we were spending money. So I'll highlight a few of those as I go through. So the excellence in learning pillar, one of the significant investments we made over the past few years was having literacy and math coaches at our middle and high schools. Historically, at the kind of 3 or 4 years ago, we had coaches at our elementary schools, and we actually had 2 or 3 coaches at each elementary schools, but no coaches at our middle and high schools. So as we were trying to push forward some of our other big initiatives, including the rollout of high quality curriculum, it was imperative that we had coaches at those upper levels to ensure that there was increased support for our teachers as we rolled out new curriculum. We also added additional guidance counselors at the elementary schools. Our elementary schools did not have guidance staff historically, but that was done again through taking a look at how positions had been allocated historically in the budget. And both of those investments have been in place for, I think this is the 2nd year or the 3rd year. Yeah. 24 will be the 3rd year. We made significant investments in unified high-quality elementary and secondary curricular materials. So for those on the finance committee, you've seen contracts come through as we've added literacy and math and science by grade level over time. And we've been able to do that each year, kind of in a sustained path. We've also added additional special education classrooms to lower the class size at our elementary level, and are adding reading specialists to support some of our learning acceleration work. In world-class talent, we made significant investments not only in people and adding assistant principals at our elementary schools, but also in increasing the number of professional development days for teachers. So historically, the district had 1 orientation day prior to the start of the school year, and through collaboration with our colleagues at the Providence Teachers Union, we increased the number of professional development days over the past few years. We've also taken efforts to attract and retain talent, both in the form of signing bonuses for new teachers, as well as significantly increasing, well, I should say, initially there was no reimbursement for the ESL certification. We've now increased it to $8,000 for those who are interested in obtaining it. We are currently doing a pilot of directors of school operations at our high need schools to support principals in their working environments. In the other 2 areas, we've added school and community specialists and culture coordinators at our middle and high schools to support both work in the school to build school culture, but also working in the community and in directing students' homes. We've increased translation services and taken steps to digitize student records and made expanded our parent ambassador program from 30 to 40 schools. On the efficient district system side, we've made investments along with our partners at the city to establish a capital revolving fund, and that was funds that we put in that were one time, but lead to year after year kind of a sustainable revenue stream to support capital work outside of the major capital projects that we have to do in districts. And then a lot of the other items you'll see here coincided with the pandemic. terms of furniture, technology, and PP&E. But many of those have long-standing effects and will help student learning beyond certainly beyond the pandemic. So those are a little bit of what we've been doing over the past few years, and that we will continue to sustain this coming year. One of the things I wanted to highlight that was new this year was our approach to budgeting. And so let me talk through first kind of the goals and why we did that, and I'll share then how it works and why it's different from how we did that before. So key goals with student-based budgeting. First is equity and ensuring that we are aligning the way we allocate funds to schools with student needs and differentiating funds based on differentiated needs at school. That ties directly to the second point as well. The third point is transparency. So schools have a clear sense of why they receive the funding that they do, versus having a little bit more of a, when you allocate funds programmatically or simply based on how they were allocated the year before, it's not always clear why certain decisions or why certain positions exist at a given school. It allows schools to have more predictability. So as they see student need increase or student enrollment increase or decrease, they can anticipate changes in their budgets. And it also provides schools with more flexibility in how they spend their funds. So let me walk through a little bit about how it works and then how it's different than how we've done it before. Actually, let me start with how we've done it historically. So historically, we would work to identify school grade structures that would help us allocate how many teachers each school would need. But then often positions like assistant principals, clerks, other support staff were typically rolled over from year to year based on who had been there in years past. A couple challenges with that kind of go to the goals were, one, as student need changed or the student population changed, funding didn't necessarily always change at that school level. So a school that might have had 2 clerks and either grew or shrunk may not see the change that they needed to do that. More so, there was a little flexibility, so kind of the staff were given to the schools without much choice, whereas now, as I'll walk through it, there's a fair bit more choice. So to talk you through the mechanics a little bit of how this works. So that the district identifies the amount of funds that are going out to school, and rather than saying you get 10 teachers, you get 15 teachers, it is based on a student weight. So each student receives a certain level of funding that then goes to the school, and students with higher needs, whether it's a multilingual learner, student that's differently abled, student in the CTE program or other programming that we operate in the district that requires additional expenses, that additional funds are kind of follow the student to that school. That then allows the school, so you might have 2 schools that are similar in the number of students at their school, but one with a much higher need population. That second school would receive additional funds, while in the kind of the former model, they would probably receive more similar funds. So that once that the funding is allocated to schools, they then have the opportunity to build their budget. Now, in many cases, if you're running an elementary school, you need the number. Everyone needs principal. Everyone needs at least 1 secretary. Most need 2. You need the number of teachers that you need to staff your building. So I don't want to make it sound like it's like a blank canvas, because like anyone who runs an organization, there's core staffing. But there is greater flexibility in those areas that in the past, whether it's in non-personnel funds or in others, that schools have more discretion to make the choices that they think are aligned to the needs of their students. But also we know that the funds that go out to schools are better aligned with student need versus just a kind of a blank, just based on staffing allocations as have been done historically. So to share a little bit about what that has looked like in practice this year, and I'll say that this was our first year doing it, and it is a pretty significant shift in how schools, both schools do this, but also how we need to function in the central office. So I'll say that the first year we did it kind of in a very, we wanted to make sure we got it right, that it was smooth, and there weren't major changes. So what you'll see here are some kind of case studies and what we saw happen. And while this wasn't kind of the full wide open, everyone can do, there were guardrails attached. We thought that it ended up leading to some different and hopefully better outcomes than we've had in the past. So let me walk you through a few examples. The first is a case study of a large elementary school that has a high pre-K population and a high special education population. Typically those schools would have their staff allocated to them. We saw schools making somewhat different choices, so they were able, schools with high need student populations actually took the funds, the additional funds they received, and if they were significant enough, in this case, they added an additional administrator to support the supervision of the special education programs or the pre-K programs. And investing in additional administrators is significant, so that that was limited, but it was in some of our schools that are large and had the highest need, and frankly had maybe been underfunded historically. The second example is of a medium-sized elementary school that may have not received a significant amount of funds, but as they looked at their school improvement plan, they saw that they needed more small group instruction at their upper elementary levels. And in this case, they were able to repurpose funds to add an additional instructional assistant, an additional teaching assistant to support small group instruction at their upper grades, which most schools have not been able to do historically. There are certain cases, of course, where schools may have lost funding than they had historically as based on enrollment changes. And so one of the things that this helped us see was that staffing at our middle and high schools were at a student-teacher ratio that was far, far lower than at our elementary schools. And some of that's to be expected, like the course offerings we have at our middle and high schools are more diverse, more complex. But we also learned that the way we've scheduled has a significant impact on not only the resources and how resources are used, but the time on certain subjects that students are able to spend time on. So
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
So it's targeted resources, and some of these examples are staff professionals. Has this shift to student-based budgeting resulted in a net increase, like net decrease regarding staffing levels, or how is that shaking up? Reconcile that for me with also declining enrollment.
yeah, yep. So it was probably a net decrease because we've seen, and that's not because of student-based budgeting, that's just because we have fewer students. There were schools that saw, like on an individual school basis, we saw some small increases, particularly at our larger elementary schools. But at some of our middle schools or high schools that had been under-enrolled or had been staffed, and certainly we did see decreases in the number of teaching staff that they had. But so in this case, they adjusted their schedule and they actually were able to put more time on ELA and math while reducing the number of teaching staff. And that had a lot to do with the work the teams did around how schedules were set up, because oftentimes those schedules have a huge impact on the number of staff.
Can I ask a question as well, since we're
Please.
doing that in this particular section? I've actually got a couple different questions, just so I want to make sure I understand.
Yes, please.
How this works. So is there, I mean, when you say the funds sort of follow the students, is there a formula of some sort that sort of works in, poverty levels, special needs, MLL, all of that?
Yeah, so to walk you through it real quick. Every student comes with a certain level of funds regardless of need. And then we work with each department to say, okay, what are the additional costs to support a multilingual learner student? That might be because of class size, that might be because of extracurriculum that they need or other things. And so that base rate for every student is probably the largest, but then there are add-ons that go for each student depending on, I think you hit on most of them, multilingual learners, special education, and there's some differentiation between special education levels, knowing we have some that are a bit less, the most severe. And then poverty was the third kind of major bucket. And so those are then, it's not that every school student you have to spend this much on this student. It is then aggregated for each school to say, take up all your students, you take how much each comes, how many dollars come with that student, and then that's the money that's allocated out to that school to then make decisions.
Is there any attempt in the formula, maybe this is too complex, some of schools that have higher percentages of students in some of those categories may actually have additional needs because of the sort of compounding of the effects of having those many students. So is that taken into account in the formula? Do you understand what I'm saying? If you have one school has 50% language learners, another has 90%, having a school that's 90%, if the same amount follows each student, I think from the school's perspective, maybe more resources are needed if there's a higher percentage.
Yeah, let me just say it back to make sure I have it. This is the right math term. It doesn't scale linearly, right? Like every one extra, it actually gets harder the more concentration you
That's
have.
the point. I'm not a math person.
Right now, no, it's a good question. Right now, it doesn't. I would say there's a practical impact though of that, which is when you do have a significant number of students, particularly because staff end up being kind of can often have the biggest impact on supporting students, that like when you have a concentration, you actually have enough to afford a full teacher, a full TA, a full assistant principal, versus other ones it's still funds, but as often you might have to use it for non-personnel that might not have that impact. So short answer is it doesn't. But I think some of our Title I funds do, because the bands are based on concentration, like the way the bands are based on concentration.
Concentration, because that's the one I actually know something about, is concentrated poverty in schools, and I know it sort of compounds or whatever the mathematical term is, so the consequences. I had two other questions about this specifically. There could be perhaps schools that are seeing declining enrollment, and then funds might, under this formula, be reduced. One would assume that they would, but such a school might in fact need additional funds in order to reverse the circumstances that are causing the declining enrollment. And I'm wondering how that gets, or if that gets factored in.
I'd say a couple ways to respond. We didn't have to do it as much this year as other districts do, but there is often a process called soft landing, which kind of is a fail-safe if there's any projected significant reduction, that it prevents any reduction beyond a certain level. We didn't have to do that, but that is built into it in case there was a kind of a more significant reduction, that there's a smoother decline than what would happen. I hear the concern about how, like, if someone loses students, they might need more funds to then provide better support. The counter to that though is then there's another school that's receiving more students and probably needs additional funds to support the more students that have come in. So it doesn't solve the problem you're mentioning, but I think the challenge I've observed historically is that as enrollment has changed, staffing hasn't. So you can walk into two schools that have the same number of students and you're saying, why does this school have the X, Y, and Z and this doesn't? So it's not perfect, but provides some rules to how that funding is allocated.
Yeah, where the adults are, so it's going to be a little stickier than the needs. That sort of makes sense. So my only worry is the sort of spiral downward in the case of a school that has declining enrollment, therefore less money comes into the school in case it has this is not analogous, but I'm going to use it as an analogy anyway. I'm the chair of the history department at my university. History enrollments are declining and have been for 10 years. The amount of money allocated to my department goes down as our enrollments go down, which prevents us from making investments to do things that might cause the enrollments to go down up again. So that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this way of doing it, only that perhaps that's something that needs to be watched carefully for some of our schools that where enrollment is going down.
That's good.
And then my last question is just if maybe you're already going to talk about this PD support for principals to implement this. Are our principals being adequately equipped to do that?
Yeah, I would certainly ask you to, if you see a principal, ask them, because they're going to tell you, they're going to be honest and tell you how they were supported. But let me tell you what we did. So we had monthly principal PDs that we have with all our principals, and for September, October, and November. Yeah, every 2 hours of that were devoted to getting ready for this. And so, I think it was just reflecting, it was good. I think it's not real until you get the budget in your hand. So then a lot of the support was in December and January. And Chris, and I think if Cheryl McCrate is in the back still, spent a lot of time over winter break and prior to budgets coming up to actually do one-on-one support with principals. Because again, I think we did a good job of preparing and saying, here's what's coming. But until you get the numbers for your school, see the impact, it's not as real. So I think we tried to prep them, and then we're kind of all hands on deck once budgets come out.
And then perhaps opportunities for them, the principals, to speak to one another would be helpful as well, just to learn from best practices and so on.
Yeah. And I should add too, we've done kind of after action reviews with principals. So at the last principal meeting, we pulled them all during, we had a small group that we did mock budgeting with in the fall. We pulled them aside for lunch and just asked honest feedback on how it went. We also did that with central offices to understand what could be better. So we're trying to make sure we build on what felt like a success this year for future years. I'll spend a little time talking about our spending on stimulus dollars, and knowing that we'll probably, and I'll share a little bit more of what comes next, but we'll be back with the board to talk about this in the coming months as well. I think it's important to start by looking at all the kind of funds that have come into the district since the pandemic began. And there's really been 4 major rounds of funding, which began when the start of the pandemic. So the first was ESSER 1, and I should know this by now, but we just use the acronym ESSER. Yeah. But so ESSER 1 was the first round. CRF, the coronavirus relief funds, were the second round. ESSER 2 was released, like we were notified of it in December of 2020, and then ESSER 3 was notified in March of 2021. The amounts, as you can see, have gotten progressively larger. And so as we walk through, we'll talk through kind of where we're at, big picture with all of them, what's been spent to date, and then what the future plans are. So the first 2 rounds of ESSER 1 and CRF, which totals roughly $50 million, have all been spent. And we've continued to prioritize spending funding that expires soonest. So ESSER 2 is set to expire September of 2023. It is fully encumbered. So that means there's a small amount that still needs to be spent, but it is already kind of spoken for prior to September of 2023. For the last round, which is the biggest tranche, ESSER 3, that came the latest, again, at the end of the school year 21. We've spent and encumbered roughly 21% when you look at both spent and encumbered. So that is the next kind of focus we're working. The reason we share this as one kind of pot of money is, in many cases, while the due dates are different, the purposes are often the same, and so it's helpful, at least for us, to think of this as one major spending. And so we are roughly halfway there, with more than half encumbered moving forward. So if
Can I have a question there? ESSER funding dries up eventually, right? What are we looking for in terms of PPSD funding next 2 to 4 years after 2024, right? So what should we look for in terms of in the future? I know that's not the focus of this particular budget, but it's something that's in my mind.
It's a big question. Like, how much funding do we need, or?
I don't know if there's any projections in terms of, this one-time funding sort of dries up, and we're in this weird state of takeover. By this time this dries up, we're talking about a new school board, potentially a hybrid model. Maybe the schools go back into control. I guess my main concern is all of this dries up. The funding's in bad shape. You have new leadership all over the place, and we're under-resourced. And I guess my hope with this question is that we really plan out, financially what we need from the state whenever there is sort of a transition back. Saying, hey, that ESSER funding is dried up, and I guess that's one of the concerns that I have.
Yes.
And President Roja, no.
Yeah, I'm going to jump off that question and ask that question kind of in a different way. How much of this is single-time expense versus recurring expense that we have to sustain in future years?
Yeah, we have done our best to avoid the recurring expenses. So when I talked about some of the investments we made over the last few years, guidance counselors, APs, coaches, those all live on local dollar, local and title, so they aren't ESSER funded. So we're hopeful that those aren't sustained by what you see here. Some of the major one-time curriculum purchases, we've been able to leverage ESSER dollars, and we feel good about that, because then often what you're just having to do is smaller replacements that you can fund locally. Things like PD dollars have been a mix of both local ESSER dollars, but that is something that is not baked into the contract, but something we'd like to extend. I think as we get, and this will go into the second part of our presentation, I think many districts are facing this now where not just in Rhode Island, but around the country where enrollments are declining and they're facing some tough choices about like, it doesn't seem right to say, man, let's cut everything out because this is the time we need to be investing. And it also feels irresponsible to invest in a way that's unsustainable. And that is frankly, Chris can correct me, I don't think we've crossed it, like we got to a spot where we have put a significant amount of kind of long-term funds on ESSER, but with enrollment declines in the coming years, we will have to make some difficult choices about what happens after it. So that is to say, like, there are not significant portions of our core staffing, or really any of our core staffing that lives on ESSER, but some of the investments we've made, unless kind of city and state revenue keep up, those will be difficult choices that we make. We won't have to make, I don't think, for next year, hopefully, but in years to come, for sure.
Can I ask a related question?
Please.
Actually goes back to one of the earlier slides. You guys showed that the city's contribution to the budget has essentially been flat during my entire time on the board. And then some in the last 10 years or so, but maybe it's gone up 0.4%, pegged to inflation. It's actually gone down in that sense in real terms. And as a percentage of the budget as a whole. And maybe this is a question for you, Zach. It might also be a question for Charlie. I'm not sure, but I think the answer would be useful for the board to know and the public as well. What are the city's obligations, in terms of funding the schools under the Crowley Act and the takeover, and maybe just under state law in general? Yes, I guess that's the first question, and then my second one probably depends on me. First one. No.
I can answer that now. We have, that is actually a core part of the second half.
Okay.
So and hold me to it, like it is, we will get to it. If I can go through the ESSER stuff, we can get there real quick. If that's okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I just,
okay.
I want to set things up to call the city to account if it needs to be called to account, so that's why I asked the question.
So if we look on what has been spent to date on the next slide, you'll see that roughly half of that has gone to things that we would consider student learning acceleration, whether that's high quality curricular materials. When we've done those purchases, expanded summer school. So it now, for folks who have been here, it's new. For folks who are new, they think that every year we have this huge summer school where that's not always been the case. We've often had credit recovery. We've had some good partnerships, but we, for the past few years, and we'll continue this for the next few years, had robust elementary academic and enrichment programming for students. That has been an investment that we've done in the past few years, as well as increased professional development for staff during the summer, after school, and with outside supports. Another significant portion of that, about a quarter, was our COVID response with PPE, hand sanitizer, HEPA filters. This was also in the form of some staff to do COVID testing, safety upgrades at our buildings, as well as some changes to classroom enhancements. And then another quarter that was around efficient district systems, in many cases tied to the pandemic, with technology being there, but also for signing bonuses and other things to attract and retain staff. When we look at what lies ahead, we see that obviously shifting the COVID response going away. That much more of that, the remaining portion is going to be going to our learning and acceleration pathways. So some of that is continuing or enhancing what we've done already. So that's extended learning opportunities for students, including summer school, before and after school and April break. And we are looking to greatly enhance during the school week and school year after school learning opportunities or extended learning opportunities. We'll continue with the purchase of high quality curricular materials as we've been doing over the past few years. And then we are adding staff, in some cases temporary, to support student mental health needs, whether that's in the form of social workers or behavior technicians that can work on a day-to-day basis with our students. The smaller portion of that will continue to go to support translation and interpretation and other family engagement activities that we've done, incentives for talent, as well as some safety and security and data tools and systems investments. We're at this point now where we recently submitted, RIDE had an amendment open for ESSER 3. it was submitted, and so it is now under review. So it would be a little bit premature to share the exact details of that plan until we've had the time for them to review it and approve it. But the amendment is largely on the same path of what we were doing before. Like I said, many of the things like summer school and PD, we are continuing with some small changes as we've learned both what students need as well as what is achievable with those funds. So with that, again, we'll be back to talk more with the board, but I can transition to talk more about our local budget details, and I'll actually start in pretty quickly, Mr. Santel, with the question that you posed. So the first slide here is a little bit of a rough overview of how to think of our budget. So again, key revenue drivers are state aid at about 2/3, city aid at about 1/3, and then other, which is Medicaid, and a few other items that accounts for less than 2% of local aid. So state aid, and again, I'll apologize for folks who know this fairly well, but state aid is driven by average daily memberships. They look at the number of students in the school district over a certain period of time. There's a little bit of a weight if you've been here the full year versus part of the year, and that is provided. That is the main driver of allocation from the state, along with free and reduced lunch, and as well as anticipated seat additions or reductions. It's grown in recent years, but expected to slow down. And I will say the last few years, and I think I can, even though I haven't been here super long, like the state aid has been fairly unpredictable in ways that has been a little bit unprecedented. So with enrollment declines across the state, there's been hold harmless provisions over the past few years, though this year that provision went away, though new kind of soft landing provisions were adopted to help prevent more significant declines from students. So what you'll see here is what the legislation, I think it's as proposed, but will certainly still need to be signed and ratified by the legislature. City aid, and this is where it's worth spending a bit of time. So historically, city aid is based on maintenance of effort. And so cities are required to maintain effort, maintain their funding, not reduce funding to school districts, but that is the minimum. Under the Crowley Act, city aid is tied to the total increase in state aid to education. So if you look at the amount, if the state gives $1 billion to all school districts, and the next year they give $1 billion 1% increase, the obligation would be the city to increase their contribution to the district by 1%. There have been, and I will largely speak to the former administration because much of our time on this matter has been with them. Did not agree. I won't represent what their position was, but they ultimately did not provide additional contributions to the school department. So there was the state treasurer withheld funds that were coming from the state to the city. And we ultimately entered into litigation and then mediation with the city on funds for the past 3 years. And so we reached an agreement this fall that was kind of ended the discussions on contributions for FY21, FY22, and FY23. So FY23 being the year that we're in. So if there were it's like no precedent setting as of that. So we do need to come back, and we have started those conversations with the new administration. And so while we were able to receive more than they had allocated originally, we did not receive the amount that we had, believed we were owed under the Crowley Act. And so that will show on the next slide the kind of impact that you see for FY23 on that. But that is an area that is, there's two parts of it. There's obviously the amount of funds, and as a district, we want to make sure we responsibly have the funds we need to support our students. But it's also predictability, and that's actually, frankly, what makes the challenge here is not just the amount of funds, it's the, is it going to be this or that? Because it's really hard to build an effective budget if you're not sure exactly what your revenue is going to be in. And in no year do you know exactly what your revenue is going to be, but the swings you start to see here as things compound becomes pretty significant. I'll quickly talk to the expense drivers, but then I want to pause to go to Mr. St. and see if any follow-up questions. But I think it's important to talk through expense drivers and knowing, like many school districts, most of our expenses are in people. So when you look here at salaries and benefits and retirement, that takes up roughly 3/4 of our expenses. And that comes in the form of salary increases, also substitutes overtime, but also employee and medical benefits. So benefits are, for those of you who are new to Providence, in Rhode Island, the benefits rate is pretty significant, and so roughly runs at 50% of salaries when you yeah. So so all in, it ends up being about 75% of our budget. Other portions, key service contracts. So our facilities contracts is roughly $20 million. Transportation contract, not too far off at $20 million. And then RIPTA is another kind of key service contract. The last one is special education, and that is not staff for special education. That is for non-public tuition and contracted services. And as we'll show, that's an area that has grown significantly, in part because of the pandemic. The last note, just to tie these two together into a point someone raised earlier, as you see, if your expenses are largely people, and if you think of just based on kind of basic cost of living increases that you see between 2 and 3%, you would expect that your expenses grow at roughly that as well. But while the state aid may keep up or is close to that, if a third of your revenue is roughly flat, like URO is, having to play catch up or having to cut just to stay above water. So I think we can talk about the years ahead, or we can talk about recent years, but when you look back at that first chart where it's decades of flat funding, like that is when your expenses, when that revenue is only growing at 0.5% and your general expenses grow at least 3%, like it is a challenge to maintain the level of service that we provide. So we'll talk through the specifics of FY24 next, but I want to pause there to see if Dr. Santo or anyone else had questions.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, I suppose. Some of which you probably wouldn't feel comfortable answering. I guess I want to try and understand the cities, and I know it's the previous mayors, and maybe this is the setting in which you talked about, but what the city's argument was and still is the agreement. It sounds like fell short of what it appears that the Valley Act required the city to do. Was the city arguing that some of the state funds were federal funds that was sort of bumping up the state contribution artificially, quote unquote? It didn't have to be that by the city. I think it's useful to have this conversation because we now have a new mayor and the citizens, taxpayers of the city don't have any control over their schools, but they do have control over the city council and the mayor. Which hopefully we tax ourselves to pay for schools. So if you don't feel comfortable representing what their argument was, since I know it's litigated, feel free to pass, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know
Joe is not directly involved.
I don't know that I'm better positioned to answer the question than Zach is, but I think there were a few different facets to the argument, and the argument changed, I think, a few different times. So I probably couldn't give you a really tight synopsis as to exactly what they're looking at.
I mean, I remember hearing a lot of describe it once. I mean, I guess all I would say is, as I think about this, the people of this city have, at best, flatlined their contribution to the public schools in the last decade or so, to contributing to a budget which, in and of itself, is grossly inadequate for the educational needs of our children. So I just want to sort of make that point. Not a question.
Yeah, I mean, like Charlie said, I think there were a number of arguments, and I didn't find many of them compelling. I would say some of them had to, it's if you look historically as having given no increase and then find out there's a increase and that compounds the next year, and then I think it's just and we've had this conversation and with the former administration, like we know we are one city, like what is good for the city is good for the school department and vice versa. So like no one wants to ask for more money than we think is going to do harm to the city in any way. But I think there was some it was a big change from how they had thought about funding schools. And it came at a time when, we had a global pandemic that caused financial and other hardships. So,
and I guess the only other thing I would say, this is more of a school board comment, but it is one of the reasons for the school board to be vigilant and perhaps vocal at the state level with regard to funding formula and possibly other changes to the law that might create a steady, growing progressive source of revenue for the Providence public schools beyond what presently exists.
We'll look at the next slide, and I'm going to spend some time on this one, not going line by line, but there's a lot here, and I'll try to distill what is the kind of the biggest things to look at. So what you'll see here, 4 columns. The top half is largely state aid. The bottom half is city aid. And what you'll see in the first 2 columns on the left are FY23, so our current fiscal year. And the columns on the right are the upcoming fiscal year, so projected revenue. So what you'll note up top is our state aid, and that is consistent from the budget to the projected actual. The main change is that change in city aid. So a pretty significant decrease from 143 to 130. What the agreement was with the city was roughly $10 million to cover the last 3 fiscal years. And based on the timing of those funds, they were booked in FY21 and FY22, meaning that FY23 was left at the kind of pre-intervention level of 130. So that was a $13 million decline in revenue from the original budget to now the projected actual. When we look at 24, I'll start with the state aid here. And again, the state aid in both of these scenarios is is the same. It's the city aid that is the variation. So what you'll see is that the funding formula here, the funding formula is a decrease, and that is based on the removal of the hold harmless. However, there are these the stabilization fund, temporary enrollment adjustment, and other things that allowed that number to increase slightly. So on that top line from the state aid, we are down maybe a little less than $1 million. There was also an increase in the ELL categorical funds. Now, those are funds that are restricted and support English language learners. But if you kind of roll those together, that leads to a little bit of an increase of $1 or $2 million in state aid from last year. City aid are kind of 2 what we would view as I don't want to say 2 ends of what is possible, but I would say the first end is the pre-intervention level of 130, and the 153 is what, based on the compounding of the Crowley Act, would be for next year. So that's kind of maybe the realm of possibility, but I think we obviously believe that it needs to be a lot closer to that top number based on what the statute requires. That kind of, as we've had to do this in a few years, particularly in the first year with the pandemic, where state revenue was very uncertain, we're kind of trying to take the same approach here of how we deal with uncertainty here and how we plan for next year, and actually thinking through a range of scenarios for budgets. So I'll talk through next about kind of when you look at what does this in net mean, when you look at net revenue changes and projected net expense changes, what is the ultimate out, what are, again, the starting point or range of possibilities. But before I do that, any questions on this fund chart?
In regards to the group home aid, reduction of $79,000 of the FY23-24. Can you explain, I know that's the state aid, can you explain why that downward trajectory?
I'm not an expert in that area, but I believe it's the state calculates on the number of beds that are available in Providence. So we project the number of beds for students for the group home aid. So there's probably a reduction in the number of beds, if you will, as they call them, or categorize them. So that's why we see a reduction in that.
Thank you.
It could be as a facility could be projected to close in 24.
That was my assumption.
What is density?
That was a particular hold harmless category that the state put in FY23 for the number of students that we were going to lose going to charter schools. So it was a formula that they enacted a few years ago. That was the sunset in FY23.
So if we look at the next slide, walk you through, it's one way of thinking about how you kind of start your budget planning and then whittle it down from there. So we'll talk about kind of starting revenue decreases in this case, as well as starting expense increases. And the way to think about this is take our budget from FY '23, don't really make any changes except kind of natural cost growth or cost growth you anticipate without making any reductions, even though you will be based on enrollment and things like that. And we'll walk through what those reductions are on the next slide. But again, if we're talking about the scenario where there's just on the revenue side, if we were to look at what was budgeted last year to that pre-intervention level, that could be roughly $13 million change to the negative in terms of revenue. Because that was how, as we built our budget for FY '23, it was based on that 143, and then that revenue number changed late this fall. So that's a decrease on the revenue side. When you look at expense increases, you'll see the major, again, most of our expenses are in salaries and benefits. So much of that increase comes from just natural salary growth, cost of living growth for our employees from all employees, non-union, union, and others. That comes with corresponding benefits increases, and that's what we've seen historically over other years. The next one is LEA contribution to public schools of choice. So as if a student enrolls in a charter school, obviously that state aid does not come to the district. But if it's a Providence student, there's what's called the LEA portion, meaning essentially the portion of our city aid that comes to our student is what then is provided to the charter school to support that student is the kind of comparable to the city aid portion that we receive. Special ed tuitions, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, we've seen a significant increase in the number of students that are being both identified for special ed services as part of the pandemic, as well as a challenge in finding qualified educators to support those students. So we've seen an increase in the number of students being placed out of district for that are differently able. And then the last two, we'll see kind of other service increases, and that's often our kind of cost of living or the CPI related to facilities and transportation contracts. And then utilities is something, again, a natural kind of growth there from year to year. But you take those together, that's roughly $30 million swing when you add the decrease in revenue and the increase in expenses. So a pretty significant challenge as we look ahead. So before I share the kind of initial plans to start closing that gap, it is worth, I think, always taking a step back, and if you look at the next slide, thinking of like the broader context, both nationally and in Providence. So this issue is not something, and I encourage you to look, online and other places nationally. What you'll see here are some headlines, one of which is from a pretty a group we like to follow, Economics Lab at Georgetown, that does a lot of work on school finance, but they do a nice job of kind of summarizing and synthesizing what's going on. It's helpful to see what is similar or not similar to what's going on here. But as they note, they see a kind of a perfect storm in the coming years, and I think you all, Travis and President Rogel mentioned, as we see ESSER funding drying out, enrollment declines, inflation, there are a number of things that compound to make the coming years difficult for school districts. As we mentioned before, PPSD's challenges are largely driven by revenue declines and uncertainty versus we haven't seen kind of out of control expense growth, but really seeing revenue that's grown not even on an absolute basis, but on a per pupil basis, revenue that's increased much lower than cost of living. And while there's only maybe a little bit more than 0.5% difference, that's compounded, right? So that's every year, and so that is what that's while the context above is national, that is the second bullet is really around the PPSD context. In addition to that challenge, we have seen continued growth in student needs, so substantial increases in the number of students needing out-of-district placements. And then revenue for special education classrooms. When we talked about, and actually I should have mentioned it as we talked about student-based budgeting, the student-based budgeting is how we, the district, allocate funds to our schools. It has nothing to do with the amount of revenue that comes in for students. So we don't typically get, based on categorical funding, you may get slightly more funding for multilingual learners or special education students with different able, but the revenue isn't largely different. So if you have a class size that is 10 students versus 20 students, the revenue you're bringing in does not often sustain the staffing in those smaller classrooms, but we know we need to do that. So that is what we see as a challenge for the district. I do believe we've been taking a strategic approach here so that we are prepared for a lot of these challenges. So while we have made some difficult choices staffing wise and reducing staff over time as we've seen enrollment decline, we felt that was necessary so that we aren't kind of sustaining core funding on ESSER or other things. We also, and this has come up in other conversations, but for those of you who recall, during the initial stages of the pandemic, the district shut down for a third of a year. We didn't run buses, we didn't use utilities, we didn't have overtime. And so we did, in that short period, generate a small source of reserves. Part of that was because at that time we had no idea the state budget wouldn't be passed for another 6 months. So we spent the first part of that year not knowing what our state aid was, and we were level funded. Stimulus dollars had not really materialized, and so that funding initially was just to open schools. We did not end up needing to use it at that time because of the influx of stimulus dollars. But it allowed us also, historically, as a school department, the city was on the hook if we were ever to run a deficit to cover that deficit. They are no longer on, and I think they say the same thing. They are not responsible for that. So while just as the city has reserves, the district now has a small number of reserves. It's less than the kind of recommended percent of what you see nationwide, but it is something that we have and that we believe in case we need to use it to smooth some future declines. That is, while not ideal and not sustainable, allows us to kind of be smart about not facing the fiscal cliff that I think many districts will face in the years ahead. So if you look at the next slide, and then I think we're close and can open up to broader questions. But this is kind of an initial approach to closing the gap in FY24. So as I mentioned, that starting gap, again, old thing, making no changes, you see a roughly $30 million gap through reductions to operational savings. And some of that is, or much of that is changes in staffing due to enrollment declines. It's also the closing of several of our schools where utilities and other things will not be incurred by the district. So that has allowed us to reduce spending there. We also made changes to the way we were scheduled at our middle and high schools. And at some point we can share more about the work that was done there, but we moved in many cases from schedules where teachers were programmed for 5 periods out of 7 to ones where they're programmed 6 out of 7, which is pretty common in other places. But that allowed us to, put more time on our core subjects while often reducing staffing needs. And then often cases, as many of you know, we have had vacancies at our middle and high school level. So this was a way to also reduce classroom vacancies. We have had a few increases, particularly in the areas of pre-kindergarten, so we've tried to continue to add classes there as well as to add special education classrooms, so that was a net add. But taking all those together, it's a roughly $10 million decrease in our gap, which still leaves roughly $20 million remaining as a starting point. So we are hopeful and anticipate some of that being closed in ongoing conversations with the city. What you'll see here is a reverse of the ELL categorical. So in here, we assume that the ELL categorical is to cover existing costs, whereas in an ideal world, we are using that to fund new initiatives or new supports for multilingual learners. So if we were to receive the full kind of Crowley aid that we would anticipate, that would then roughly get us to even for the coming year. So that is the current plan we are working towards, and when we're back in May, we can share more about how those ongoing conversations with the city have gone, and as well as what else we consider here. I'll move through this quickly because I think we've touched on a lot of this. What some of the upcoming uncertainties or things we're thinking about. So state aid, again, I think we feel pretty good about this, though this still needs to be ratified and voted on by the legislature. Fringe benefits are something that we project but don't know until later in the year. But again, I think our projections are pretty consistent with what we've had historically. City revenue contribution is the biggest open question that we are continuing to talk with the city about. And then obviously we've started to address some of these key cost drivers in terms of staffing and district footprint. But that is work that we'll be doing in the upcoming years too. So in terms of next steps, we'll be back in May to share a more detailed budget with the school board. And we'll be working on our consolidated resource plan, which is the Title I, Title II, and other federal dollars that is due in June 1. And then lastly, we'll work for approval and finalization of our budget for the upcoming school year. So I believe that ends the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any more questions that you have.
Thank you, Zach, Chris, Sal. Any questions from school board members regarding this presentation?
I have more of a comment than a question.
Dr. Santos?
I guess there's two of them. So one is that I think it would actually be, especially because we have so many new school board members, it would actually be very useful for us to get a briefing at some point about the funding formula and various discussions about how to change it, and preferably sooner rather than later, since there's legislation that's live about this. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, I feel like every year I've been on the board at about this time when we get this presentation, somebody brings this up. Half the time it's probably me. And nothing has happened with it. My understanding is that, like a lot of urban school districts, BPSD has what I guess would be a 501c3 nonprofit foundation arm. I know in the Boston Public Schools, the Boston Schools Fund raises and distributes tens of millions of dollars from the private sector, corporate sector, grants and so forth. If we are going to be facing some sort of fiscal cliff or sharply declining hill or whatever we want to describe it here over the next couple of years, this may be the time now for us to either reactivate that foundation arm of the district, or if there's some question about the way it's structured, abolish it and create a new one, so that we can begin to engage the corporate community, business community, foundations in the city and the state to help. We, as I understand it, we have less money coming in from that sector to our district than most other comparable districts do, given all the land that's owned in the city by entities that don't pay taxes. It would be really helpful for us to look into it. So I just wanted to sort of raise that for my fellow board members, not so much for the two of you. And thank you for all of this. You've made a lot of things that to me are very unclear, much clearer. So I appreciate it.
I just wanted to add one more over there. The RIAS, right? That's the way you pronounce it, right? RIAS. But the Rhode Island Association of School Committees, I know they're having on Saturday the 29th, they're going to have a presentation with Luca Palmer, which I have a conflict. I'm going to try to see if I can get there specifically for that. That could be a good conversation to talking about Luca Palmer. I just want to bring it up because I think that is, in terms of school funding formula for new school board members, that could be a great opportunity, especially with someone like Luca Palmer in Johnstown.
Thank you, Vice President Escobar. And I just want to say that as part of our onboarding process, the finance team here at PPSD has been extremely knowledgeable and helpful and accessible. So I just want to say thank you, especially to the new school board members whenever we have a question. Any other further questions for this team?
I have a question.
Someone took?
There's nothing positive about teachers leaving the district, but when teachers do leave the district, and we bring in new teachers who are presumably lower on the step scale than the ones who left, does the overall teacher-related payroll go down as that happens and help to mitigate some of the effect of what we're seeing?
It does. I mean, I think, yeah, we started to see, it does have an impact. But given that the vast majority of people stay year to year, the impact is not large.
Yeah.
But we do, as we do our projections from year to year, we started to, we look at the number on each step each year and then help that say kind of project everyone forward, assume some attrition. But it would lessen the complement over time. About, I think, three quarters of our teachers are on the top step. So it's significant.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that? Is it, I know in other institutions, certainly in universities, this happens, incentives for early retirement can be used. I imagine there's economies of scale, maybe at the state level or something to do that, but I mean, we want to look at all options, I suppose. I don't know whether that's a possibility at some point, especially if so many of our teachers are more senior, maybe, incentives for early retirement that save us money.
Yeah, I mean, we've thought about it. I think a couple things that here is obviously we want to retain great teachers, particularly in our highest need areas, and so oftentimes we wouldn't want to do that. And early retirement, you actually, Charlie can correct me, we can't, you still have to be eligible. It's more of an incentive. It's not like, actually, we can't pay to,
It's complicated by the fact that it's controlled by the state retirement system and the regulations. So unlike the city system where we can do a little bit more in terms of healthcare coverage, I don't know if that's
Use Georgia's.
There we go. It sounds like it is. But unlike the city system where we can be a little bit more creative in terms of providing some incentives for additional healthcare, maybe some cash incentive as well, it's the state system is not really set up for us to do that. So we can't really be as creative and come up with as many enticements as we otherwise can when operating just purely within the city pension system.
We did have we did in the spring of 2020 enter into an agreement as we had some changes in staffing with Local 1339 to enter into a retirement incentive, which I think worked well for both employees and
Yeah, we previously negotiated them for both 1033 and 1339. But the situation with PTU is a little more difficult given it's the teacher retirement system.
Maybe you can't answer this, but if how do you think that the board can be most constructive with the city in encouraging a more fair funding of the school system out of the city budget than was experienced in the past administration? What are the right ways for the board to act to be assistive in that process?
I don't know if I know the answer to it. I mean, I would say we've had great, and even with the former administration, we worked well with on a number of fronts, and we worked very well with the incoming administration. So it's not, it's hard, right? It is a, I think this is entirely with the last administration. So everything I'm going to say, whether it's true with the incoming one as well, but they obviously have to build a budget, and they're nervous about any time they are. I know they are facing tough financial times as many cities are, and so adding anything to it. So it's trying to find if there's any common ground or alternative revenue sources that can be, that can be used to support that are sustainable. But I don't know. It's tough.
I'll chime in with my 2 cents on that. I mean, as taxpayers, so it takes two, both part of the legislator and the executive branch at the city level to pass this budget. My suggestion to everyone is, as tax-paying citizens, as voters of this city, reach out to your local city council person. I bet you in many instances, they're not even fully aware of the details of this arrangement. And I would encourage school board members, I mean, just normally, regularly check in with your city council person, but check in regarding this specific item if it's a concern. All right, gentlemen, thank you. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. 21st Century Media Centers Initiative and School Safety Security Updates presentation. Thank you, gentlemen, and I just want to shout out Ms. Aiken for constantly, persistently bringing up school safety as a issue that the school board should lean into a little bit more, and hence this presentation tonight. So thank you, Ms. Aiken, for your advocacy, and I hope that the information we are presented tonight is helpful.
Good evening, members of the school board. I'm joined by my colleague, Brian LeMay, who's our Director of Facilities. Thank you for inviting us today to share, school safety is our #1 priority, but as well as an update on our media center project. So I'm going to kick us off with that and share some news there. But the goal today is to ensure that the board has, and our community as well has, an update on where we are with the media center project. That is the initiative that's happening at the district, and provide an update on school safety and security. As I said, that's our #1 priority for all of our students and staff. So I'll kick us off with the media center. The goal of the media center project is to ensure that we have multifunctional spaces and bring our libraries to the 21st century, where they can be used for multiple purposes, serve multiple needs of our students, communities, staff, and and other needs at the school level. The district has been holding a committee meeting every week since August, when this initiative was brought to the district, to really think through that space and what the purpose of that space is. To mention some of the members who've been part of that community, or the committee members who've been contributing to that. It has been the PPSD librarians, the URI library, the current OPM for the city, which is the operations manager, Downs Construction, Teaching and Learning, and a number of other members who have been, part of that committee, leading the charge of what that space should look like. And the goal is to make sure that, again, those spaces are utilized in ways that we have not in the past. And so to make sure that we are serving the needs of our community and our students. So with that, we have been tasked to upgrade at least 15 media centers by the fall of 2023. And what you have here, or how we're doing that as a committee, and in partnership with the city and other stakeholders, is in phases. So phase 1 has 6 media centers that have been awarded. Those contracts have been issued, and the permit process is underway. And so those have started to come to fruition. We have architects and a lead partner who is Tecton, who has been helping with the design and sort of incorporating all of the feedback that we've been getting from all those committee members who've been meeting weekly. Phase 2 of the project, those contractor bids have been received and are being evaluated by the city and the OPM in conjunction with PPSD. And again, those media centers will also start this summer. And then the phase 3 that includes middle schools, those bids were out. Contractors were actually walked through this week to see the space and to be able to learn what the needs are in those particular schools to transform this space. And a lot of what's being used is, again, multifunctional furniture. So we're looking at, technology. We're looking at how you use the furniture that's in the space for various needs. And that discussion has also been taking part in the school building committee, where we've been providing design concepts, updates, and project timelines. So in addition to that, we have the capital projects that are happening that we've brought in front of this group before, but we're also looking on how to ensure that, that's not living just in the 15 media centers, but they're part of the ongoing capital projects for the new construction as well. And so what you have here is a list of all those schools that are already in progress and have been, adopting also the media center upgrades, so that again they're servicing our students' needs in a much different way. Right, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Brian LeMay, Director of Facilities with the School Department. One thing that we're doing with this is we're backwards mapping. So we're looking at the new construction projects that are currently underway throughout the district, and where we have the flexibility in those spaces to create. And what we're doing with the 15 media center projects we have fixed spaces. These are existing classrooms. These are some that we're looking at taking space from next door, utilizing underutilized spaces inside of there, and bringing that 21st technology, the furniture, and the same. We're setting the same bar for the existing school buildings as what we are the new school buildings. This way, there's consistency in the media center projects, whether you're in a brand new PPSD school such as Spaziano that's currently under construction, or you're going into an existing building that could be close to 100 years old. So we want the opportunities for the students to have the 21st century technology regardless of where they are in the district. We're also looking at developing standards through not only our building standards, which we talk about at our school building committee meeting, but also developing standards and with conjunction with the media centers. So as staff and students go to a PPSD media center, there's some sort of consistency. It doesn't mean that every one of them have to match, but you're going to have consistency in technology, you're going to have consistency in some of the furniture that's there, the way that you look up books, the different storytelling areas that they have inside of there. The goal is to have one space inside of the school that can serve a multitude of different functions, and for that to be mass populated throughout the district.
Next slide. So what you have here is a rendering of the Nathaniel Green Middle School Library. And as you can see, it is a space that, again, it's in an existing building that's, an older building, but provides a new and refreshed space for students to be able to spark that creativity, whether that's a maker space or, collaboration among students. So just to give you a quick update on that, abatement happened over the last couple of weeks. So that's been completed. Ceiling grids are being installed, and sprinkler lines are actually, being relocated to ensure that, that space meets codes. But excited about that. And, as we walk through those spaces, we want to make sure that students are in a space that is conducive to 21st century learning. So that's our media center update. I'll pause there if there are any questions or comments based on that before we move into the school safety.
Thank you for that overview. I do have a question. Last school board meeting, I can't remember the specifics, but we had a couple of folks in public comment talk about either the libraries being closed, librarians not being available. So I guess my question is, for the start of the 23-24 school year, all these schools that are going to be online, are they all going to have operational functioning, either a media center or a library at the start of the school year with the librarian?
To my knowledge, yes, and I don't know if Scott is still, or Zach may have left, but to my knowledge, yes. I know there were some comments around the Hope Library. That is a space that was redesigned. I don't have specifics in terms of staffing because that's not, something that I'm able or prepared to answer, but I certainly can bring that back. As far as we know, the libraries are remaining in the current libraries and either are being upgraded or remaining in session, and the new schools that are coming online also have the media center.
Thank you. Any other questions, school board members, regarding this portion of the presentation? Ms. Hagan?
Yes, thank you, Jim. In regards to the older structures, with the new, media centers, will there be upgrades to the electrical systems and, ventilation to support those expansion?
Yes, in some cases, those are, areas that, again, the contractors are looking at to ensure that what's the lighting that's happening, that is, the existing building is able to support that structure. So yes, that's part of the process as well when they're renovating that space.
I can just add on that a little bit too. As we developed our scope of work, we walked through the space with Tecton Architects, who was hired for this project. And Tecton is also the contractor that's doing Spaziano, both elementary school and middle school. So they're involved in our district standards that we have. So before we brought contractors on board, we walked each of these spaces with school leadership, so that this way we can be on the same page as far as, you know, what the vision is for the space. A scope of work has been developed for each of the spaces. Each of them has a varying scale of work. Some need little work as far as, and some need total alterations, which include adding air conditioning to the space, or upgrading lighting, or taking walls down to enlarge the space. So the scope is different in each of them, but we try to have equity inside of the space to include as many of these items as we can. Some centers that we're building in some of the new schools could be up to 3,000 square feet. Some of them that's an existing building could be 800 square feet. You know, so we're trying to make them as equitable as what we can be, given the constraints that we have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aiken. Any other questions for this portion of the presentation?
I have a question.
Mr. Matsuda?
You mentioned that the scope of the projects are different for each school, but are you bidding out the projects for multiple schools at a time, or is each school being bid out as an individual project?
So the contractors are being awarded per phase. So we split them up by contractors. So phase one that was listed is one contractor is being awarded 6 locations. Phase two, we had a walkthrough and those bids are under review. Phase three, the walkthroughs actually were completed tonight. So we are looking at one contractor award per location. And Marin Construction, who is currently doing the renovation project at Green, that's on the screen right now, is the awardee for phase one. So they're already familiar with work that's happening inside of the district. They're already a contractor that's been involved in other PPSD projects, and we're looking at kind of expanding on current projects we already have underway that is successful.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matsuda. Any other questions for this portion of the presentation? Hearing none, we can move on to the second part.
Okay. So as I shared, school safety, that is one of our top priorities for our students and our staff. And so when you think about school safety, there's not one particular item. It has multiple facets, right? And so what you have in front of the screen today is what we look at when we think about school safety and security. There has to be, you know, some protocols and procedures that are in place to ensure that our staff is prepared and able to handle any emergencies that may occur. There needs to be consistent and reliable communication among teams to support our schools and our administrators during any kind of emergency, as well as our families. And there's training and accountability that has to happen. And obviously the facilities and infrastructure plays a role into that as well. So what I'll do tonight is sort of give you an overview in each of those categories and what has the district been doing, or how have we been tackling those buckets, and provide an update on where we are in terms of, you know, the work that has happened most recently as it relates to recent events that we may, you know, unfortunately have encountered around the nation. So I'll start with protocols and procedures. The standardized PPSD has an emergency binder that's a standardized security protocols that encompasses about 36 scenarios and situations that may occur. And these are, you know, ranging from a fire to an active shooter scenario to a secure lockdown. And so we have done that work in partnership with multiple stakeholders, including the school board. So most recently, that book gets updated every 3 years. And it was recently updated this past summer of 2022, where we came with, you know, the current procedures that were in place and the suggestions that were made, whether it's through REMA, the city, in partnership with PPD or Providence Fire Department. So it's really a collaborative effort to ensure that all those perspectives are accounted for, and those scenarios are cleared and staff know how to react to that. So we work together collaboratively to incorporate any updates. And like I said, it gets updated every 3 years. We added 2 particular scenarios based on, you know, recent events that might have taken place. either here locally or nationally to ensure that our staff is prepared to address those. In addition to that, we are mandated to do 15 mandatory drills to support our students and our administrators and prepare them on how to react to those. So those have been in place for as long as we have done an update on making sure that we are supporting administrators in real time. So we have new staff members that have been added to our school safety team, deputy directors of campus safety, where they're actually going out to schools, observing these drills, providing real-time feedback, creating roundtable discussions with the school team to say, you know, what went well, what could be improved, how can it be improved, and what are the next steps as they continue through those practice drills. The next bucket is one that's really important: communications across teams, because as you've probably heard from the superintendent, it's a team effort. There's no I in this type of work, and it really takes a collaborative approach to ensure that our students and staff remain safe. So again, standardizing that communication across all our schools, so that in the event of whether there's a drill or actual event that's taking place, that staff is aware rapidly and in real time, that families receive concise communication as to what we know in real time, and then provide updates as the situation continues to evolve, right? So we have dedicated teams to support students in school safety. So that's district-wide teams or crisis teams that are deployed if an emergency was to occur, who are responsible for responding and assisting those schools, and at the same time working with the school-based crisis team that is implemented at every school. So again, that they are being equipped with the resources that they need. So emergency communications, one thing that we heard and from previous feedback is to ensure that there was a way to communicate more concisely with staff and parents. And so this past summer, our communications department did a lot of work to create templates, to have a communications representative at each location. So each school has a representative that if there was a situation, they know who to contact, who to share that information, so that the district is able to support with disseminating parent information, parent communication, staff communication, and then following up with a more comprehensive letter within 24 hours of that event, so that they understand what took place and how the district responded to that. So again, that's sending real-time updates for families and other stakeholders, transitioning to a new district-wide system of communication for staff, because one of the things we heard loud and clear was that there isn't a way to mass communicate with staff in real time. And so we're looking into upgrading our current platform that will allow us to do that with staff. It's there for families, which is our Kindle system, but we didn't have one specifically for staff, right? And so we want to ensure that that's in place. And that platform will be able to identify and communicate with all staff, not just the school base, but also any vendors that may be coming into the school, or any partners that are working through at the school throughout the day. So food services, custodial staff, so that they're also aware of what's happening and making sure that they're prepared to support the school. A lot of that training, which you'll see in the next slide, I think it's the next bucket, also took place.
Jump in quickly?
Yes.
Just referring to the 15 drills, they're not the same drill all the time. Some are fire drills, some are lockdown, some evacuation, monitoring. So they're not the same drill constantly. We have to watch the kids.
Thank you, Superintendent. So again, part of that training and supporting is making sure that school-based folks are planned for students who may be taken outside during one of these drills or emergencies. Increase the PD and the support around that, and having consistent systems in place to support schools. So that's the roundtable discussion that I was mentioning, and observations in real time. And so we increased not only the training for school-based staff, but again, for partners who are in our settings, in our buildings constantly, as they need to be also prepared to react and respond. So we retrained all of our existing and new principals on all of the updated emergency procedures and protocols that were updated this past summer, and offered on the ground support with the drills, held roundtable discussions, and hired two campus safety deputy directors who are constantly in our schools supporting our administrators with that aspect. And in terms of the facilities and infrastructure, investing in a consistent strategy to ensure that there's, part of the work that Brian has shared is that this standard exists because the current infrastructure, we know that it varies across the schools, right? So again, that it was hardening doors, ensuring that main level windows or glass doors are safe and secured. Ensuring that our capital projects that are coming online are informed by these or influenced by these findings. We did in the summer of June of 2022, we did a safety walkthrough at every single school that included PPD, fire department, community, city leaders who offered and volunteered the time to come in, evaluate every school, and provide either current trends or findings that could support with enhancing the security and the safety of those buildings. And a lot of the some of the work that you'll see in the next slide that's been happening has been informed by those safety assessments that were conducted. We continue to replace and repair cameras, and we hired a security consultant who helped us define that standard, who helped inform based on their findings, and they presented at the last school building committee, who worked with our administrators, observed and assessed every one of the locations, and kind of helped us identify, what are the trends, what are the opportunities to strengthen the safety and security. And a lot of that has to do with defining that standard. So all of our new builds, our light new builds that are coming online will have that standard. We'll continue to work with them in terms of the existing buildings that we have. So if you see the next slide, you'll see some of the investments that we have created in the last 18 months. That was piloting door monitoring at Nathaniel Green, a system there with Airmark to ensure that you get alerts when any door is propped open, or you get notified because many of the there are many exterior doors, and so lots of points of entrances, making sure that we are aware when doors are being opened or closed. We're piloting a full comprehensive security system both at West and Gilbert Stewart with our current provider, and learning from that as we continue to work with our consultant. A number of replacement in terms of current security infrastructure, so video cameras, access points, door closing, the door closures, but also the access points to ensure that those doors are being monitored. We have replaced over 76 doors district-wide, and that was to harden in those doors and make sure that those exterior doors are closing properly and not able to be opened, from the outside. And then, that approximately was about $350,000 investment. It is currently in progress of that, that first phase. And so we have been working with our current provider to Airmark to execute on those replacements. And that has been mostly completed for the first phase. Again, working with the security consultant to continue to define that standard and get that feedback. We worked with our partners with the city in terms of the rec centers, because some of the rec centers are attached to our schools, and so we want to make sure that there's clear care and control and division in terms of who comes in and out. We just recently had a walkthrough at Sack Street and found ways in which we could provide additional safety both for the use and purpose of their recreation center, but also thinking about the students and the staff that are in the building and share the space. And so a lot of that work is underway. And then continue to make significant improvements on fire alarm systems to ensure that those are functioning and properly functioning for safety precautions for our students. And I think that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation, but I'll open it up for questions.
Questions from school board members?
I have one.
Vice President
Is,
Escobar?
is there a ranking of school districts, like a national ranking of school districts among the safest in terms of their protocols, their technology, what they have in place, their procedures? Is there a ranking that suggests? This is one of the things that's here in this presentation, which I'm so thankful for in terms of this time. Thank you for again in terms of making this happen. And I asked that question because I think something we should strive for in Providence. So I'm a child that witnessed gun violence, right, growing up, and I understand the impacts on mental health and all that, and just sort of seeing that in different school districts is triggering in terms of just knowing what the students go through nationally, right? And I hope to God there's never a day like that in Providence, never a day like that in Rhode Island, right? And just hearing this presentation, I would love to confidently say to parents, say to our community, Providence is the safest school district in the nation. So that's why hearing this presentation, I'm like, is there a ranking on that? Is it something like that? Or?
So I'm not aware of a ranking most per se, but what I am aware is that by law, we have to involve the state police. I think it's every 3 years and conduct those safety assessments to continue to ensure that our buildings are as secured and as safe as possible, right? And so the one that we just did back in summer of 2022 allowed us to find some additional enhancements that are able to be considered, informed. So as we continue to improve our security, I'm not sure if there's a ranking by district. At least I'm not aware of it, but it is something that it's heightened, and so given all the recent events, but there are systems of checks and balances in place that you have to do. That every LEA has to do in order to ensure that it is a continuous topic that's monitored, progress is happening and evaluated. So that safety assessment that I mentioned, it is a requirement by state law, and I think it's every 3 years.
Yeah, and I guess.
Just to add on that too, one thing that we're looking at with the standardization is we're doing that backwards mapping, which I mentioned as we're building these new schools, which are complete state-of-the-art technology advanced, we're taking that same technology, the same vendors, the same security consultant, and we're bringing those to the buildings that are existing. So that same technology is going into these buildings that are existing. And the door project that we have that's going around, the door hardening, it's very important because all the doors in the district have been looked to make sure that they're properly functioning. The doors are latching, that the door closures are closing when people go and open the door and a student leaves, the doors are closing properly behind them. So those are being evaluated throughout the district because you have the most state-of-the-art security system, but if that door is left open or it doesn't shut behind someone, then you have an entry point. So the biggest thing is that we're looking at is creating that standardization, whether the building is new or the building is old.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice President Escobar. Any further questions, comments from school board members?
I just wanted to make.
What's up?
Sure. Okay. It just looks like a small bullet point on this list, but I wanted to say that in the buildings committee meeting, we had a presentation by the company, which I think is called Guidepost. Guidepost. bullet points of contracting as a security consultant to help the district. It's much more than just a bullet point, I think, on this list as far as the potential impact of the overall safety of the system. It was a comprehensive presentation by a nationally well-regarded security company that I think is trying to bring a standardized approach to all of the buildings throughout the district. And not to speak for you guys, but I just thought, I would mention that because, while it will take, I think 18 months for the recommendations to be implemented, I was very pleased when I saw that presentation. It made me feel like we were really moving in a very, progressive direction for security for the school system. So,
Share that presentation with the board.
Yeah, certainly can be shared with the board as well. And so, yes, it's 18 months in terms of the implementation or the definition of that standard, and as it gets adopted into the new school construction or existing buildings, just it'll take time to roll it out and make sure that it's in place. But that is the goal, to ensure that our buildings are as safe and standardized when it comes to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mansell. Ms. Hayden?
Yes, Chairman. In reference to additional cameras, it's an article recently in the Providence Journal questioning the cameras if they're surveillance or security. Are those cameras, I read the article, couldn't ascertain that myself, but are those cameras on continuously, or are they only on if an incident arises, or how do they function?
So right now, our cameras are continuously on, and again, the infrastructure that exists, it varies by school, right? There are schools where you only have a camera at the main entrance, and very limited inside, where you might be at one of our high schools or middle schools, and they have both surveillance cameras inside and outside as well. The ones that are in place are on and are recording. The difference between what we have and what guideposts recommended is that not only are you able to use the analytical and artificial intelligence that exists in the new systems and the new cameras in a way that's more proactive, right? So when someone opens the door, you get a notification and a quick clip of that video of who's coming in and out or who's in that vicinity, so that you are able to respond in a much quicker way that we're not able to see with the current infrastructure. So some of what their recommendations and what they've learned over their experience and over the years that they have done a lot of the work in education facilities is how do we use the newest technology to have a more proactive approach rather than a reactive. Many of our schools right now, if an incident happens, they're able to go back into time and look at the video footage and kind of identify, but it's not being done in a proactive way, right? It's not like in real time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aiken. Any other questions from school board members? Hearing none. Thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation tonight. Yeah, this is extremely useful, and if you haven't already, I would say you guys do this presentation for the Parent Advisory Committee. I think they'd be extremely happy to have this information.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is executive session pursuant to Rhode Island General Laws, section 42-46-4 and 42-46-5A1, personnel non-renewals. Do I have a motion to enter into executive session? Do I have a second? Second. I have a motion, I have a second. Any discussion? Can we call, Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
George Matu.
Here.
Tony Aiken.
Here.
Mark Santel.
Aye.
Erlen Rojo.
Aye.
Travis Escobar. Tyrell Stevens.
We are now entering into executive session.